Hello, everyone. My name is Jasper, and I work at Signicat and will be your host today. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on the Digital Operational Resilience Act, better known as DORA, which takes effect on January 17, 2025. On behalf of Signicat and Kopenhagen Consulting, I would like to thank you for joining us today to discuss this important regulation that aims to enhance digital resilience in financial institutions. I'm excited to introduce our speakers. I will start by mentioning our special guests from Copenhagen Consulting, Peter and Alexander, both experts in risk management and digitalization. Peter and Alexander will be joined by Mansour and Jon from Signicat. Both of them bring invaluable experience in cybersecurity and technical platforms. Let's have a short look at the agenda. Peter will kick things off to cover the general introduction to Dora and third-party risk management, and Alexander will present a specific client case that illustrates how they assisted the client with Dora. After this, Mansour will provide an overview of security governance and compliance at Signicat, highlighting how Signicat, as a third-party service provider, supports financial entities on their journey towards Dora compliance. This will be followed by Jon, who will explain how Signicat ensures digital resiliency. And lastly, we'll finalize this webinar with a Q&A session. So feel free to ask any question you might have in the questions menu. We'll pick the best ones at the end of the webinar. With that, I'll hand it over to Peter to kick things off. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesper. Really quick introduction on myself and my colleague Alexander. My name is Peter. I work in Kopenhagen Consulting. We are, as the name alludes to, a consulting firm situated in Copenhagen. We help our clients implement effective risk management, and for the past year and a half-ish, we've been working a lot around the DORA regulation. Alexander, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Alexander, also from Kopenhagen Consulting, as Peter mentioned, and I would say for the last 1.5 years, I have done nothing but work with Dora. So I would say I have some competences and some experience working with Dora for clients and for other companies also. Thank you.
All right, let's jump straight to it. I think my screen will be showing. So today, I'll just tell a bit about the firm we are really quickly. We're around 45 individuals situated in Copenhagen, serving clients in most of Europe, but of course with a focus on our local market, Denmark. We work around the topics of cybersecurity, risk, and digitalization. And that's really what I want to briefly say. You can find much more information on our website. The agenda we'll be covering today is quite ambitious. We intend to covering both the regulatory background of Dora and sort of the overall timeline, give an overview of the main Dora chapters and some of the key items to consider before implementing Dora. Alexander will, as mentioned, cover the learnings from a real-life case and the insights that we obtain while working with clients. We'll talk about some of the common pain points that we're seeing in the market where our clients are struggling. We'll zoom in on third-party risk management and why this is a key aspect of Dora. And then finally, we'll provide some closing arguments in terms of where do we propose to prioritize if just starting now. An ambitious agenda, but we'll attempt to cover it in the next 25-ish minutes. Before we look at what is in Dora, it's worthwhile taking a look at how Dora came about. So historically, EU regulation in the financial sector has been based on directives. And this has meant that they have required sort of local translation or transposition and has resulted in a lot of national divergence, basically different regulatory schemes that financial entities operating across markets had to adhere to. This makes it burdensome for the organizations to operate and also creates a lot of legal uncertainty. This is made further complicated by the fact that financial sector regulation and the monitoring of the financial sector in the EU has been done by three primary agencies: the EBA, European Banking Authority, EIOPA, European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, and then finally ESMA. And they have not always been consistent in the way that they have applied their focus and what they have regulated. So basically, this has created a need for harmonization across the countries and sector enabled by two primary elements. First of all, there's the EU single rulebook concept that creates a unified regulatory framework for all countries to operate in. And secondly, there is the fact that the three regulatory agencies have since started collaborating in what is known as the European Supervisory Authorities, or the ESAs. So in summary, a single rule set across the countries and increased collaboration between the regulators that monitor the countries. In 2020, cyber risk was recognized as a potential source of systemic risk in the EU financial sector. It was recognized that the financial system across EU is highly interdependent and interconnected. But it was also recognized at the time that no regulation or nothing in the single rulebook actually addressed digital operation resilience or ICT security. So this is the background for Dora. Around the time when it was recognized, we start seeing some of the first discussions on Dora, and that's the background and the basically objective that Dora aims to achieve. So the overall purpose of Dora is to ensure that the EU financial sector can maintain resilience and stay operational during disruptions. So it provides sort of a common regulatory framework obliging all firms to comply with uniform high standards of resilience. And it aims at overall strengthening the industry's security and making sure that the sector as a whole can stay resilient. It applies to a quite broad category of financial entities. I'm sure some of the people on the call today can recognize themselves in some of the items mentioned here, but I think it's important to state that if operating in the financial sector and not necessarily being able to recognize yourself here, it is probably the fact that you will have to maintain compliance with Dora anyway, as these are not exhaustive. So if that's the case, we are encouraged to seek a legal opinion on this. If we look at the overall timeline of Dora, as I mentioned before, we saw in 2020 the first legislative proposal of what would eventually become Dora was published. And then after 2 years of regulatory deliberations, the Dora Act was signed and it entered into force in January 2023. And that meant that from that time, it started the implementation period, the 2-year implementation period, and of course, the period up until the 17th of January next year, where organizations are expected to comply with Dora. Which means in principle that from the 17th of January 2025, financial entities in scope of Dora can expect some level of oversight based on this regulation, and they will be expected to comply. So let's jump to an overview of what is actually in Dora. So the key areas in Dora, or the key pillars in the regulation, are these 5. I won't dive too much into detail with it now, because I think there is something important also to cover before diving into detail with this. But also it's important to recognize that the overview that we have here on the screen is not the full overview. The regulation also includes quite a bit on what is the responsibilities of the regulators in terms of monitoring the critical third parties. But for the organizations looking to obtain compliance, this is more something to keep in mind and not necessarily something to consider in compliance efforts. Before implementing or before starting with too much of the Dora preparation, it's important to notice this concept, the critical or important function, because it influences a lot of the Dora compliance work. We've tried to basically remap this into a more simplified way of considering it. At the very basic level, a critical or important function is something that can materially impair the financial performance of the organization, or the continuity of the services, or materially impair the continuing compliances. We like to say that it's something that can either make the shareholders, the customers, or the regulators really mad if it stops working. That is our simplified way of considering it. Also, it's important to consider that Dora contains a proportionality principle, Article 4. Again, Dora covers a quite broad range of entities, and they will differ in scope, size, and complexity. So in the regulation, there is included sort of a principle that organizations can apply to implement what they feel is necessary for them. And this goes across the 5 pillars that we showed just before, that the organizations looking to implement Dora need to consider that it's proportionate to their size and complexity. So basically that they apply a risk-based approach to implementing the regulation. If we revisit the areas, just really quickly covering what is in them, the first area, ICT risk management, as you can see on the screen, takes up almost as much space as the other combined. This is basically where the overall framework and the foundation for ICT risk management is laid. It includes everything from identifying critical important functions, implementing protective efforts, being able to detect, all the way to learning and evolving the ICT risk management framework. This is basically sort of the overall structure of the risk management in the organization. It also includes the topic-specific focus area of the incident management. If something happens, organizations are supposed to be able to respond to the incident and recover from the incident. And Dora includes some quite specific requirements on classifying and reporting major incidents. It also introduced this digital operation resilience concept, which basically just expands the requirements for testing of the implemented risk management measures. It includes the management of third-party risk. It builds upon some of the existing regulation in the sector, for example, the EBA guidelines and outsourcing, but applies that more broadly. And then also it covers the voluntary information sharing point, which we are yet to see how will actually be implemented. We won't go into details on the call today in terms of what is in the regulation. Our firm have prepared 2 handbooks or guideline documents that provide summarized descriptions of the regulation and provides a bit of guideline on how to approach complying the regulation. Also, we've summarized one of the key RTSs, regulatory technical standards, and provided a quick 77-point checklist in terms of doing a really quick gap assessment of the established risk management framework. But again, as I said, we won't go into detail with the actual regulation today, considering the time. Instead, I'll hand over the word to my colleague, Alexander, who'll take us through some of the learnings that we've obtained from real-life cases with clients.
Thank you, Peter. So diving into this case, a little bit of background information is that this case would be like a mix of our client work. So we have been working on multiple clients with Dora, and then this is our learnings from this work. So going into this implementation of Dora, the first step that we have identified as a quite important step when working with Dora is the requirement of management to set the tone, the strategy, and the risk appetite or tolerance at the board of director, or at least the executive level of how you want to work with Dora. What is the risk appetite for ICT, and what is the strategy for digital operational resilience and third-party risk management? But also in addition to this, it's also, what we have learned, is very important to set the ambition for implementing Dora on its own, as its own project, or as its own line of strategy in the company. And what that means is that what is your goal towards the 17th of January? How mature do you want to be? What is your goal for implementing Dora? And even beyond that, what is your goal or ambition for maybe the whole of 2025? So when this are on point, or when you have agreed upon the ambition for Dora, I would move on to our next step in our process. So now we have to decide, do we want to make this implementation a project in the organization? There could be some pros and cons. What we have experienced is that almost everybody works with a project in some form. It could be a big project, it could be a smaller project, depending on how large your company is. But the plus side is that often a budget is easier to isolate to a specific project than it is if it's just a part of daily operational efforts to get compliant or to implement all the areas of Dora. But either way, if you choose to do this as a project or not, it's very important to assure that responsibilities are assigned to whoever has to make the decisions around Dora. So who has to implement different areas and who has the mandate to make decisions. And this leads us to the next step. So now you have set up like a little bit of organization around the project or around implementing Dora in your daily operations. So now you have to identify, where are we as of now? How mature are we in our information security or our digital operational resilience? and that leads to a gap analysis. It could either be a very hard or very broad gap analysis, or it could be a more softer approach where we only dive into the Dora Act and regards a little bit about the RTSs, or the regulatory technical standards. But either way, you have to assess the existing processes in your company, your tools, your resources. How do you work with information security lined up against Dora? So when you have done this gap analysis in some way or form, you will move on to the next step, where you will actually decide upon how to prioritize mitigating all these gaps you might have identified, what we would call an action plan. So here you will maybe identify through the gap analysis that you have some larger gap in your IT risk organization regarding how you map your IT risk to your enterprise risk or your company risks. But you will have to then prioritize, where is this work in our project in Dora? And then we have to set the timelines. We have to set or allocate the resources. So some actions or some deliverables in this implementation will maybe require external help. It will maybe require a lot of different internal resources to be allocated to solve these gaps. But now you have made a plan. You know what to start with. You know where to start. And now you are going forward to actually trying to implement these actions. So you have to design the solutions. You'll have to design maybe a policy on digital operational resilience, a policy on how to manage IT risk in your organization, and now you have to implement this design. But this could also lead to maybe some new training, new information to be shared with your colleagues in other parts of your organization. Specifically, we could mention incident management, who is heavily touched by Dora, where you might have to have a new process trained to your colleagues, and how do they report risk, report incident in your company. So after implementation, make sure that your other colleagues are also informed and trained on these new processes. And from this, we have learned a lot from our clients and our work with implementing Dora. We identified a few areas, 8 to be exact, where we have some do's and don'ts, some hard learnings on what we would like to share, which we would like to share with you. And going to the first one, talking about how to involve management early and throughout the process. So make sure, as mentioned, that you have set these maturity goals for Dora. What has to be created towards the 17th of January, and what could you maybe wait with until after the 17th? What is the most important work right now? Has to be set at the top. So set the tone and let it trickle down in your work with the project. And if we go on to the next one, you have to set the risk appetite and tolerance, also I've mentioned. So if you don't have this risk appetite or tolerance already formalized in your organization, it will be very hard to create the policies and the procedures that will be necessary to actually comply with Dora. So making this risk appetite and tolerance formalized will make it easier for you to do all the deliverables beneath that moving forward in your project. And this leads us to another insight. So as Peter mentioned earlier, there is this important function around, this important job around identifying your critical functions in your business. And what we have learned is that you can't assume that the management or the board of directors or executive actually know or agree upon what are critical functions in your organization. So help them reach this realization by making an impact analysis in some way or form. And what we have seen is that misalignment on this will also trickle down in the project. So if you are not aligned on the critical function, that will also mean that decision makings regarding other deliverables will be postponed, and deadlines might move forward in time. So very important to be aligned in the critical functions. Next one is defining what asset security requirements you have in your organization. So now you have defined the critical functions, and now we see that there are two approaches to what criteria you might set for your own IT assets, your vendors, your processes. There are two approaches that some companies will work with. One is a binary approach, where you have the critical functions on the one hand and then all the other assets on the other hand. There could also be a multi-class classification where you have like business critical, highly important supportive assets, and maybe non-critical assets. And you have different criteria regarding minimum requirements for IT security around these different classes. But this is important. It is important either way, if it's a binary or a multi-class, to actually define these minimum requirements, because it will take it down to your third-party risk management also in the longer run. So make sure that you actually make decisions around minimum requirements for these classifications. Yes. So now you have defined all your critical functions. You have made requirements for your minimum requirements for your IT assets, but you're not really sure what IT assets you have or what contracts you have with your vendors or what third parties you even have contracts with in your organization. This pain or this insight is to make sure that you actually have a centralized IT asset register and a contract register and a third-party register. So what we have seen is that organizations often have maybe multiple IT asset registers where IT architecture have one list, infrastructure have another, procurement has a third one. And what this does is that it makes different lists for different purposes with different data points. But this will make it very hard to actually do the register of information that Dora requests of you, because you have so many data points and don't know what is actually the right data. So make sure that you centralize the ownership. Make sure you have responsibilities set around maintaining these asset lists. And you could even go to the register of information to identify what data points you might need. This is master data going forward, so it has to be secured as such. Next is our establishing of effective cross-functional team. So it's important to have a diverse team, even if it's just a small project and you sit with this alone. You have to at least make sure that you are informing and interviewing stakeholders on the different deliverables. Otherwise, you will have to at some point go back and revisit a lot of the work that you have done, because there's so many stakeholders. An example of this is procurement's inputs around third-party risk management and third-party contracting. If you have not aligned with them beforehand, you will have to revisit a lot of the work you have done. A hard insight we have learned working with projects, especially with teams or organizations who are not maybe used to working in teams, is the synergies and dependencies between deliverables in the project around Dora. So make sure that you do workshops with all team members where they highlight how their deliverables might impact other deliverables, from policy to procedures to risk management, because they are somehow dependable on each other's. And last, I would say that we have to identify what competencies are needed. As mentioned earlier, what deliverables are we making? Do we need maybe help from externals or internals if we don't have the competencies for, let's say, network segmentation or other expert fields? So make sure that you have identified where you might need help or where you don't have the capabilities on the internally.
Thanks, Alexander. So moving on, or speeding on, moving to some of the observed shared pain points. So really, these are some of the things that we are seeing across many of our clients and also the other places where we are asked to advise. The first one is that we have an ineffective risk management framework. It is either not fully implemented or it's dependent on Excel spreadsheets being shared around, and it has little reference to the overall business strategy. Furthermore, as Alexander also touched upon, the inventories are key, and they are often inadequate, they're often incomplete or some way incorrect, or there's many different versions. As a result of that, we often see quite chaotic incident management. We basically don't really know what assets we have and how they are influenced, and we are unable to locate this in central registries, and that means that it's difficult for us to effectively respond to incidents. Fourth, we're seeing that many organizations are performing tests to be able to say that they have performed tests rather than actually test their weaknesses. And this is one of the key elements of Dora, to actually start doing tests for the sake of identifying and remediating weaknesses. Also, unknown third-party third-party risk exposure, quite often the organizations don't know the risk exposure they have until something actually breaks. And then finally, the risk reporting as a result of the 5 others combined and many other factors is quite often lacking. Either it's based on untrustworthy data, or no one really understands what the reporting is supposed to communicate. For the remainder of our presentation, we'll be focusing on these two and go to third-party risk management. This is one of the 5 key elements in Dora, and it is a repeat of previous regulatory focus. The reason why regulators are placing such an emphasis on third-party risk management is because we are seeing quite constant incidents caused by dependencies on third parties. We've brought along a couple of examples. I don't intend to go through them on the call, but suffice to say that it's quite easy to Google examples, and they pop up every once in a while, new examples of quite important organizations that have been negatively affected by their third-party dependencies. Dora is focused on managing resilience and requires overall that organizations are able to demonstrate that they are managing risk in their supply chain, but we're also seeing third-party risk management programs being influenced by other concerns such as GDPR, ESG, AML, or other risk factors. There's many different frameworks for third-party risk management, but they all include some element of this. First of all is the overview, maintaining accurate and complete inventories. Secondly is, as Alexander also touched upon, the criticality, knowing what assets are critical and what assets are not. Being able to perform risk assessments of the third parties and perform due diligence, obtain information, and make an informed decision based on the information obtained. Ensuring that the contracts contain the necessary contractual obligations, both from a regulatory standpoint, but also because those are the ones that we need to perform the monitoring when we start the relationship. Actually perform the monitoring that we just agreed that we needed to perform, a request reporting on adherence to service level agreements and key performance indicators, but also actually look at some of how the third party is addressing some of the key risk factors in the relationship. And then finally, at least for critical third parties, be prepared to offboard or exit them in an elegant way without detriment to your organization. If you're on scope of Dora, which I assume for the people attending the call here, I would focus on these 4 items. First of all, look at the regulation article 28 to 30 and how the regulation requires considerations both from a general perspective, but also these concepts of concentration risk and the necessary contractual provision. Look at the RTS on the policy of third-party ICT service, basically outlining the processes that you are expected to have to manage this. Also specifically the RTS on subcontracting, how are you supposed to address your third-party subcontracting, what is required of you. And then finally, look at the published spreadsheets or templates for the register of information and what regulators are expecting to see here. Closing arguments and areas to prioritize. First of all, what you need to prioritize now is heavily dependent on where you are. However, as a general note, we propose the following items. First of all, functions and critical important functions. As Alexander mentioned, if you don't start by identifying these, it will slow down your progress in the rest of the implementation. Secondly, prioritize the register of information. We have it on good authority that this is the first thing that regulators would ask for sometime during the implementation date. So if you're still struggling with a lot of the Dora areas, this is a definite area of priority. Third, check that the foundation is in place. If you don't have an effective ICT risk management framework, a lot of the other areas are not as relevant. Again, we have created a short checklist that can be used to consider and assess whether you are in a solid place for the ICT risk management framework. And then finally, if you already now recognize that you will not make it by the deadline on the 17th of January, make a plan or perform a gap assessment, identify your gaps, and make a plan to remediate the gaps. Ensure it has senior leadership support and ideally a dedicated budget so that if visited by a regulator sometime after January, you're able to have a more informed discussion on what you plan to approach the gaps rather than being stuck and not being able to identify and communicate where you are in terms of Dora. that concludes our presentation for the call today. I will now hand the word to Mansoor from Signicat to tell a bit about how they are approaching compliance in Signicat.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Alexander. That was a really nice and valuable insight into Dora regulation in such a short period of time. And thanks to all of you who have joined us today. I will, before diving into the presentation, I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Mansoor. I'm Information Security Manager at Signicat, and in my current role, I'm responsible for enforcement of Information Security Program, ensuring compliance and security control enforcement and risk management. And as we all know, security is a crucial aspect for any organization, especially in the financial sector. And in this presentation, I will walk you through how Signicat, as an ICT third-party provider, supports financial entities by embedding strong security measures throughout all its processes. In this session, we will cover security in our existing processes that currently Signicat operates with, and how Signicat adapts to customer expectations and evolving regulatory requirements. And most importantly, our role as a trusted partner in your supply chain. As a third-party provider, we understand the importance of safeguarding the customers we serve. Security is embedded in everything we do, starting from our infrastructures to the services that we provide, and our approach ensures that all necessary controls are put in place, whether it's handling sensitive data or providing or managing digital identity services. And we continuously improve and monitor these processes to ensure that they remain resilient and adaptive to new threats and compliance requirements. And speaking of compliance and to support our claims to strong security measures, let's look at the Signicat certifications. These certifications actually highlight our adherence to globally recognized, internationally recognized standards, which Signicat is certified against. One of them includes the internationally recognized Information Security Management System standard, which Signicat has, and then Signicat also has a 27018 certification, which certifies for secure management of personal PII data in public clouds. Signicat also is regularly tested and audited under the SOC 2 Type 2 framework, ensuring that our systems meet security, availability, and confidentiality standards. Signicat also complies with the electronic signatures and infrastructure standard, and it's recognized as a qualified trust service provider, which is the highest level of assurance in eIDAS. Our information security management system is built on different guidance, but the majority of them are highlighted on the right side of the screen, which includes guidance for establishing information security risks, risk management, incident management, and etc. And our journey in information security governance has begun in 2015 with the strong management commitment to establish ISMS based on ISO 27001. And by 2017, this milestone has been achieved. Certification has been acquired. Then Signicat has started working on getting the report SOC 2 Type 1 and SOC 2 Type 2. And in 2019, those reports were issued correctly in 2018 and 19. In 2018, Signicat has acquired the certification as a qualified trusted partner provider. And most recently, in 2021, we earned the latest certification, which is a 27018. One of the key aspects to effective security is harmonization across technology, process, and people. And we believe that security isn't just about technology, but an integrated approach across all touch points. When we look at the technology part and how Signicat look into the managing technical aspects of the security, we have implemented, we look into the areas that are highlighted on the left side of the presentation, which is a security architecture. And for this part, Jon will tell more about it. Security of the endpoints, platform security, and having a security operations center at our hands. And when it comes to processes, Signicat's processes are mapped to industry standards, ensuring we continuously renew, monitor, and update our security protocols. But of course, no security strategy is complete without people, and Signicat puts a huge emphasis on training and awareness of our staff, that they have necessary tools and knowledge to identify and respond to threats. And looking at this diagram, we make sure that we ensure that no stone is left unturned. When it comes to the information security management system objectives, they are directly tied into the laws, regulations, and contractual obligations we operate within. This means that we are not just meeting the baseline expectations, but we're committed to exceeding them. We align our objectives within several key areas. First of one is risk management, legal and regulatory compliance, staying ahead of any changes in laws and ensuring we are fully compliant. And of course, most importantly, is customer trust. Protecting sensitive data is at heart what we do. And the verification of these objectives, whether they are met or not, we have a continuous monitoring and improvement, and that's being achieved through the internal and external audits and through the non-conformity management. And as you all know, regulatory landscapes are constantly evolving, and it's important for us as well to remain agile and ensure compliance with any new requirements. And we have a well-defined process for such onboarding. Once the new process or a new regulatory requirement being identified, a business need for alignment to a new regulation or requirement is being established. Further evaluation and assessment of the potential risks are taking place. Once this being identified, of course, you go through verification of compliance and having a gap analysis. And if there are any discrepancies to the current way of working within ISMS, of course, you introduce new requirements into the existing security protocols and processes. And once they have been introduced, Signicat is committed to follow them, and that's achieved through the effective monitoring. And now let's move into the EID services, which are integral to the digital transformation of financial institution in the modern world. On the slide presented, you can see Signicat's offering and solutions. And I would like to talk more about the expectations. From a customer's perspective, Signicat customer has expectation from Signicat to have a reliable, secure and compliant service offerings from Signicat. And on the other hand, of course, we have expectations from the regulatory and authority bodies in the countries where we operate within and provide services. These expectations relate to the functionality, security, reliability, among others. On the other side, slide, I will highlight a few of them. For this type of EID schemes, we undergo periodic assurance audits for EID schemes in particular locations. For example, DIG-ID and Air Canning in the Netherlands, Meet-ID, among others. And we get the certifications and audit reports for these EID schemes. So now let's talk about the adaptations. And we know security is not static, and neither are the expectations from our customers or regulators. As new risks emerge and as the new regulatory requirements evolve, we adapt our security processes and frameworks accordingly. And we regularly update our technology and review our processes, ensure that our staff well informed and they remain well trained. This is how we stay ahead of customer expectations and regulatory demands. And speaking of regulatory frameworks, let's look at the Dora, where the 5 pillars already been highlighted by Peter. which include the risk management, incident management, digital operational resilience testing, ICT, third-party risk management, and information and intelligence sharing. As you can see, we already have a well-established ISMS where we can actually map each area to the existing security policies and processes that we currently operate within Signicat. And that the same applies for business continuity management, supplier relationship, and cyber threat intelligence sharing. We engage in proactive communication with the stakeholders to share important security updates. And in this diagram, I would like to show how we fit into the larger financial ecosystem, highlighting our touch points and how we work together to ensure security of your operations. In this picture, we highlighted our role as an ICT third-party provider. We are not considered currently as a critical service provider by EU. And it's our responsibility in due diligence, of course, to conduct due diligence towards our suppliers, and that can be done through a verification of the SLA reports and audit reports. And in conclusion, we would like to share the information about that we understand the importance of trust and transparency. And Signicat is committed to continuous communication with its clients and can provide regular audit reports to demonstrate compliance and security measures. Those include the SOC 2 Type 2 report, the ISO 2701 certification, and the reports and privacy audit reports. And Signicat customers have rights, and not only customers, but also regulators and third-party auditors can request audits and inspection visits of Signicat's operation, including the data centers. So we believe that through further collaboration, we can strengthen our partnership and support your ongoing regulatory and security needs. And from now on, I will share the word to Jan to share more about how the technical security is established on the platform level. Jan.
Thank you very much, Mansur. So my name is Jonas Kapeteg. I am currently the tribe lead of Global Platform Tribe at Signicat. Basically means that I'm responsible for the Signicat technical platform by which our product runs. And we have a lot of customers, and we have a lot of trusted logins and electronic signatures every day. And we cater for regulated industries, financial institutions, health insurance, even government. And it is very important for us that we kind of are always available and that we are always up to date with the regulatory landscape that moves, so that we can continue to be in business with the customers that we have. This goes into how we work technically with the solutions. It goes into what contractual provisions we have with our vendors. Mansur mentioned one example that we have with Google Cloud that allows our customers and the regulators of our customers to also come into the data center for a physical inspection under an audit. We have a culture of continuous improvement, meaning that we are kind of training our staff. We are a security company in many ways. That means we also have a number of technical measures, both for resiliency, but also for security. This concept of security in depth is also a key aspect of how we operate. All of these requirements, be it regulatory, be it customer requirements, or just market expectations, can be a bit hard to navigate sometimes for the tech organization. So this is kind of then unified into our information security management system, or ISMS. So this is where it becomes a bit more concrete. This is kind of actionable and how we are working inside the company to adhere to all of the requirements that come our way. Technically, the resilience part looks a little bit like this. So we have a number of different mechanisms that all kind of make up the Signicat resiliency story. So there is redundancy, there is load balancing, fault tolerance to ensure that we can have an outage and we'll still be okay. We monitor our solutions, of course, with the incident response procedures, and security, which is also a big part of what we do. Redundancy goes also all the way down to the data center. So we have 3 different data centers that have their own unique or kind of separate power, separate networking, and we replicate then all of the services and data across these 3 zones. In addition, we have a backup site in Finland, so in case there's a flooding of all of Netherlands, we can recover our services in Finland. The load balancing, it's there because we have too many clients, too much traffic, than a single server could possibly serve them all. So super simplified, we have a bunch of servers that will each get their own portion of the traffic. But we also do this in layers. So at the network layer, this is just a down round robin. You hit server 1, then you hit server 2, then you hit server 3, and on you go. But we can add some cleverness at what is known as an API gateway, or the application layer. And here we can do things like we can rate limit incoming requests, we can check if this is an attack, and we can block it there. We can ensure that it's only authenticated requests that actually make it into the product itself. And then we can also do clever routing. We can say that, oh, you're trying to reach our eID Hub product. Okay, then I will send your specific request to this cluster to serve this product, which is then scaled accordingly to deal with the load needed for that particular product. The fault tolerance means that if we have, let's say, a data center outage, the power is out, and the remaining 2 will have sufficient capacity in our resource planning, and we will have automation detecting an outage, removing that to transparently for our clients to continue to serve traffic as if nothing happened. The replication is then always ongoing, and we have this concept of self-healing. So if we lose a replica, it will immediately start to make new copies, so that at all times we have at least 3 running copies of the data and the service. We also have this concept of auto-scaling. So it basically means that we have this declarative configuration. It works a bit like a thermostat, kind of just set the dial to, I need 2 million requests to always be possible to serve. Okay, then the platform will literally go and purchase capacity from the cloud vendor, provision it, and make it available. And this is also an adaptive system, so that if we see that there is a wildly successful campaign on Black Friday, then okay, traffic might exceed the planned expectation. The system will automatically detect this, and if the buffer capacity threshold is met, we will also go in and purchase additional capacity on the fly to deal with any traffic spikes of legitimate traffic. The graceful degradation is a bit more of an advanced concept, but it means that if a service is fully down, we make an active choice on how to react to it. So one example that we do at Signicat is if the CRM system is unavailable, like what customer has bought what product, do we allow the request or not? So typically, if you haven't bought the product, you're not allowed to use it. You get access denied. But what if we can't determine if you have bought the product or not? In that period, what we do there, we could just block all requests and the entire system would be down. What we do instead is that we take a risk at the Signicat side and determine that, okay, the system is down, we still allow the request, and then the risk to us is that we might not be able to charge for the transaction in the period where we have an outage. For our core services, we also employ this concept of canary deployments, like the canary in the coal mine. If that one's in trouble, we kind of react immediately. The way this works is that we set up any new version that we want to ship, like we have created a new feature, something, we want to launch it. We spin it up side by side, the existing version of the product, and we direct a small portion of the traffic to the new service. If we botched the release, we did some error, we can immediately roll back, and it will only be then this small portion of users that gets affected by the outage. If everything goes okay, then we dial this up until we get to a point where we have 100% of the traffic on the new version. We also have an extensive monitoring suite. This is an example of an outside-in setup. So one here is just, we try to access the service from all over the world. I had to look a bit to find an actual failing probe, because our systems is generally up. So this is one example of that. Another example is when MitID in Denmark had issues. We could see that the loading time were higher than expected, and then we can validate this by what the browser will actually see. And if it doesn't match our expectations, an alert will go out to our on-call staff. Our engineers have a need also to see what goes on inside. So here's an example of one of our clusters, which also shows all of these internal connections, the average latency on them, so that we can kind of visualize if there is a problem with a specific component inside of the overall fairly large and complex system. The on-call rotation is then always available, but we also have multiple on-call rotations, so that at any point in time there will be a product expert available on call if something would happen to react to alarms. We also have a culture of blameless postmortems, which means that it isn't really important who did what. What we care about is what happened, how do we fix it, and how can we avoid it in the future. And I'm also quite happy that we have a culture to prioritize learnings from this and to leverage them to make the solution better overall in the case of incidents. Security, big part of the design and architecture and resiliency. We have this security in depth. It basically means that all of these security layers have to fail before you can actually get at the customer data. So there's not one mechanism you have to pass, it is multiple. And one important part of this is around change management. So any change that is going to go into production, it needs to be approved by somebody other than the one that made the change. Then we have a number of automated checks to validate if you're still compliant and that it's still a secure solution. And then for production itself, we have this, network segmentations, the firewalls, the permission scheme set up. And then ultimately, when the change does get out, we have the monitoring suite with automated alerts to help us find any issues. We also are seeing a number of attack vectors that goes into the supply chain. So the code that is on the developer machine needs to be the same code that goes into production. It cannot be tampered with on the way, like a broken or attacked build system, and we have to mitigate each and every one of these attack vectors. And another interesting bit here is the dependency threats. That is something that has been more and more important in recent years. It means that there can be vulnerability on, let's say, a third-party library that we buy from a vendor or an open source. We use a lot of open source. So if there is a vulnerability in one of the software dependencies we have, the deployment will be stopped. It won't go further. If it happens to be a vulnerability that is detected later, so that after it has gone into production, it will trigger an alert so that we can respond and react to it immediately to eliminate the threat to our platform. As for the products themselves, they are highly isolated. This is what's known as containers. So that means that if you compromise one of our products, you can't kind of use that to jump to the next one. So you can't see anything on the file system. You can't burn all of the resources at the machine because it's going to be limited to how much resources you can use. And it's a strict isolation that also goes into the networking. So we have this concept of zero trust networking, where all traffic, also internally, in our data centers are encrypted between services with unique encryption keys. So if you compromise one product or one service, even if you start sniffing at all of the network traffic, you can't really make sense of it because it's all encrypted also internally. Encryption, also a big part of security. All data is encrypted at rest and in transit always. And for encryption at rest, we also leverage something called a hardware security module. So that is a physical machine in a data center that is certified tamper-proof. The certification that we leverage here is the FIPS 142 level 3. There is a level 4 to this one, but the only difference is that it has a self-destruct button. So this is kind of the highest security for protecting keys that money can buy. And as you all know, the world rests on top of 4 elephants standing on top of a turtle. For us, this turtle is Google Cloud. It's proven a very resilient, reliable partner for us. Coupled then with our defense in-depth security measures, gives us a very reliable and secure service overall. And the best part, you don't just have to take my word for it, because everything I say goes into our policies, it gets audited, and it's put into the SOC 2 report, which is also available to our customers to validate that we do what we say we do. That's what I had. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you very much, Jon. This concludes our presentation. Note to the speakers, I will now activate the panel screen so you all will be visible. While we might not have time for all questions today, our team will follow up on any unanswered questions in the upcoming days after the webinar. There have been quite a bit, so I have to be strict. I think the first one is for Alexander. Here it goes. We have used some time now aligning with management and haven't really kicked off our work with tangible Dora activities. Where should we start?
So going back to what Peter and I talked about, I would say that as we are closing into the 17th of January, I would start with the register of information if I have only limited resources and where to start off right now. But that said, I would start by identifying the critical function as the second most important or critical deliverable to do. And from there, I would start working on the board of directors level policies to actually set the tone for Dora throughout the whole organization. That is to say, the policy on digital operational resilience, probably former known as information security policies, and then a policy on outsourcing to be now the policy on third-party risk management in some sort of way. And of course, we have also heard from some people that it is important to also have the possibility to actually send in the major incidents come January deadline. So have a process internally for how you classify your incidents according to Dora is also quite high on the list of things to implement fast. Yeah.
Thanks. Another one, I'm guessing it's for Peter. In your experience, what are the most effective strategies for ensuring continuous monitoring and assessment of third-party service providers?
Short answer is risk-based approach. Longer answer is, I think this goes back to the criticality that both Alexander and I talked about, right? We want to know why these third parties are supporting our business, what they're supporting us with, and why that is important. So basically, I would propose looking at what type of vendors do we have, who are key from a confidentiality, integrity, and availability perspective, then tailor fit my monitoring to fit that approach. So for third parties with a high degree of confidentiality, focus on how they are protecting that data. For third parties with a high degree of availability, focus on what they're doing to maintain resilience. Also, like some of the things that Jon just mentioned in his talk.
Great. Thanks for clearing that up, Peter. Alexander, another one for you. I work at a small financial institution with limited compliance and legal staff. I've been tasked with leading the Dora implementation on my own. How should I approach this?
I think first and foremost, I would identify if I'm actually subject to the simplified version of the ICT risk framework in Dora, or if I have to comply with the large framework. And either way, again, make a plan and highlight where are our gaps. Working with a gap analysis as your initiative or first initiative, and going back to the questions I answered before, start off with the register of information still, and then work towards the critical functions, the policies, the higher deliverables. But of course, if you don't have the capabilities to come internally, look into if it's possible to get some kind of help from externally. I think that's the best approach.
Sounds legit. I've got a quite long one here for you, Peter. I find the distinction of critical versus non-critical third parties a bit rough. We have some third parties that technically support our critical functions, but the services they deliver are not critical for those functions per se. Should we still apply the very thorough third-party monitoring regime to those, as prescribed by Dora, or can we apply the principle of proportionality here? It's quite a mouthful.
Yes. I mean, if you just read the DORA regulation very closely, yes, technically, if they support a critical function, you have to handle it as such. I would say, though, what we're seeing in our work with clients is organizations are applying a bit more granular approach. So basically, they are assessing, does the third party support a critical function? And if yes, is it critical to the critical function? So they're sort of creating a bit more granular approach where they're able to identify third parties that technically should be classified as critical, but where they have a recognition that even if they suspended delivering of the services, it would not critically affect the service. An obvious example is something like online banking, that in many places is considered a critical function or service to provide to customers. They often have some sort of user experience monitoring tools that are provided by third parties. And I think the recognition there is, yes, it's technically supporting the online banking, but even if it breaks, it's not necessarily something that affects the ability to provide the service to the customers, just our ability to monitor how they like it and how they are navigating the site. So short answer would be, technically, there is just the binary aspect of yes and no to critical, but we are seeing other organizations apply the principle of proportionality and making a bit more of a granular approach to be able to support, as I mentioned before, a better risk-based approach.
Thank you. We're going a bit over time, dear viewers, so please bear with me. I've got 3 more questions to go, and then we'll sign off. This one's from Mansour. How does your organization manage the risks associated with third-party suppliers, providers in your supply chain?
First of all, I would like to highlight that risk management actually is integrated into the overall life cycle of the suppliers and subcontractors in the onboarding and offboarding part. Initially, it starts with the initial risk assessment that checks all overall risks, and then a more granular security risk assessment is performed for all suppliers that are going to have agreements with Signicat. And further, as Peter already have highlighted about the criticality for the next year assessment, these type of suppliers are assessed based on their criticality to the business functions of Signicat. And if the criticality has been identified, they will undergo on at least yearly basis or more frequently through the security risk assessment. That's a more simple way to explain how the process works currently.
Thank you. Another one for you. How frequently does your organization conduct resilience tests, such as business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, and penetration testing?
Well, it really will depend on, first of all, on the requirements that we have for our products. If we have more stricter requirements that comes from the regulations, then of course we will be we will conduct them more often than a yearly. But from our security policies, those type of tests are conducted at least on an annual basis.
Right. Last but not least, final question from Mansoor. How do you assess the overall compliance health of your organization's security environment?
For this type of, to answer these questions, of course, within Signicat, we have a defined key risk indicators and key performance indicators that we assess of our requirements that we need to follow up, whether they come from the risk perspective or whether they are regulatory requirements. Once it's done on a monthly basis where Chief Information Security Officer is involved and receives those reports. And if any deviation is highlighted where the necessary management involvement shall be taken place, of course, we have for that reason a management review as well with the Information Security Board.
Well, thank you, Mansoor. And thank you, dear viewers, once again for joining us today. Thanks to all the other speakers as well. We will be sharing the webinar recording soon, so you can rewatch it whenever you like. On behalf of Kopenhagen Consulting and Signicat, I sincerely appreciate your participation. Please stay tuned for our future events, and I wish you a wonderful day.